This computer. Okay. I'm happy to have as my guest here Rebecca Sealfon, and we're presenting this as part of our Yom Kippur service as a study session. I thought of this because I came across an article that was in the Jewish Journal, and I happened to see Rebecca's name. And now, by way of disclaimer, Rebecca is the daughter of my second cousin. So my grandfather and her great-grandmother were brother and sister. So there's the connection. That's my disclaimer. Let me tell you a little bit about Rebecca, though. Besides family connection, the practical connection, the real value here, young writer, computer scientist, biology scientist, active, very active Jewishly with the Reconstructionist movement and social media, lives in New York City. She has an unusual forum to try to bring Israelis and Palestinians together. And I'm going to try to set up a meeting later on with one of the key people in that forum for a later session. She gets 1 million views per year on that topic. She's published in New York Daily News, Smithsonian Magazine, Daily Beast, been on Rosie O'Donnell's show. And just as a little extra tidbit, she won the National Spelling Bee some years back. So if I have a problem with my spell check, I'm going to come to you, Rebecca. All right. So, Rebecca, you want to say something about yourself before I go into the topic?
Like what?
Oh, I don't know anything.
Okay, so I think you gave a great introduction to me, and you hit on the key points, a lot of the key points. I'll probably be saying things more about myself as we go through the talk, but I guess what I wanted to say about myself is I was raised conservative Jewish in actually one of the early conservative egalitarian synagogues that had hired one of the early female rabbis. My family, my mom's family was kind of conservative, kind of Orthodox. At that time, they belonged to an Orthodox synagogue, but also because it was right nearby. And my dad's family at that time was Reform, has now largely assimilated. And so I grew up in a secular neighborhood, and I saw a lot of people in my generation kind of drifting away from Judaism. But I think that we need to send the message, we need to make the message clearer, and we need to send the message a little differently, why it is valuable. And it's not just for the people who are born Jewish, it's really for everyone in the world. Why are we waiting, for example, for the people to be dating and about to marry somebody Jewish before they possibly hear you should participate in Jewish culture? Why don't they hear that this is a live option from the very beginning? Then we might not have this supposed problem of assimilation. We are giving our own a live option of which culture to be in, but this needs to be offered to everyone else as well.
Okay, that's very good, because that's what the article was about. And I'm going to pop it up here on the screen for us to share. Give me 1 second. This out of the way. And it's very important what you're talking about with our young Jews today. Today, there's a young woman who's going to go to the mikveh to be converted officially. And I realize I have they're a very small group. All my young couples are people who, one was not Jewish originally and converted, or is right now in the process of converting officially. And so this young woman, family's from Australia, she was taking classes online, and the mother in Australia would go out, get up at 5 a.m, so she would be able to see the classes at the same time. She wasn't going to convert, but she wanted to know what it was about, together with her daughter. And then I realize I have a very unconventional congregational mix. I have people from all a great variety. We have the landlord is an Iranian congregation, so we have Iranians in our group. I have a Jamaican. I have some youngsters who are mixed Eritrean and Persian. I have Morocco. I have everybody under the sun. So yeah, we need to. Well, wait a minute. Here's your headline. It says, to remain relevant, Judaism needs a visibly open door. It's here in our Jewish Journal, the local LA paper. And I just highlight a few things out of it. 25 years ago, you mentioned Rabbi Schulweis of Valley Beth Shalom. People in this area know him pretty well. In response to greater freedom of Jews in America and much of the world and high Jewish attrition after intermarriage, he suggested Judaism return to its ancient tradition of proselytizing. And in so doing, Judaism could tap into millions of cultural Christians and others who yearn for a rich tradition and deep spiritual experience. And then, as you highlight very correctly, right, our intermarriage rate is 70%. And the problem is that even with the best of intention, when that happens, only about 28% of the children of those marriages, they're raising the children within Judaism. So then if only 28% continue, and they also continue, so you do the math, it's worse than the half-life, radioactive half-life in that terms of attrition. So you talk about Judaism has a religious tradition, emphasizes continuity with ancient times, and how it's a contradiction for a modern world that values pluralism, where this is a world that values rationalism, and we have very theistic faith. We may be very loose about it, but still theistic traditional faith. So finally, you talk about this, Jews separating the very Orthodox Jews as an approach, but then that's contrary to history, because Jews in history were always in the civilization while remaining apart. So separation is also not an answer in the long run. So your final message, a third way, and as you say, to absorb the surrounding community. In other words, we're the little tiny one, we're going to swallow the big one. Now, I said not necessarily turning everybody in the United States Jewish, but allowing and letting people know that we're open, right? Because we're a world civilization relevant to its practitioners. That's the key point that you make, right? And highlights, in order for Judaism to remain relevant, time to fully embrace the promotion of its relevance, not only to born Jews, but also to the wider world. That's the big way. So if we reach out to our own people, if we reach out to other people, our own people will understand what we're about. I'm going to say that's in a nutshell, that article. It's in the Jewish Journal. Let me see, when did it appear? Just, I didn't have the timestamp on it. I think just a week ago, a few weeks ago that it appeared. Well, let's go back now to you and take it from here. And I'm going to say, let's look at our young Jews, first of all, and that statistic. And I look at the latest Pew report, and I see younger Jews going in one of two directions. Either they're going nowhere, or they're going to some kind of orthodoxy, either one way or the other. And the two movements that were the dominant movements of the last century shrinking. And it was not just the conservative shrinking and shrinking badly, but the reform also shrinking. So what's wrong with our young Jews? You tell me.
Okay, so our young Jews who are engaged with the surrounding community have compartmentalized their Jewish identity. They have not really synthesized their Jewish identity. And I'm saying this, often whatever stream of Judaism they belong to. So they divide their life clearly into, say, the religious components, where they're practicing Judaism or they're not practicing Judaism, and the secular components, where they're living as a general citizen in the outside world, or they're not. They're basically in their Jewish communities. So that is one thing that those who chose to reject Judaism and those who chose to immerse themselves in Judaism in many cases have in common. However, it is not either or. If Judaism is to be a relevant world religion, then there needs to be a synthesis between Judaism, Jewish concepts, Jewish tradition, Jewish philosophy, and the outside world. They need to be probably more intertwined. People need to think about, for example, their Jewish community as their community, and they need to be engaged as well in outside activities where there is a mutually beneficial relationship between these other things and their Jewish community. So not as sharp a demarcation. And so their Jewish community needs to be a place, at least in the case of conservative and reform, that it is relevant to come back to, that they come back to and they find what they're looking for. Where now, Judaism has a lot of history, a lot of culture, a lot of spirituality. It brings a lot of things to the table. And what these things are, there's a lot of attention devoted to incorporating Jews into public life by accommodation. There's a lot of attention devoted to preserving Judaism like it's a museum piece. What there needs to be is attention devoted to the synthesis between Judaism and outside, which is the promise, part of the promise of the conservative and the reform movements. And it needs to be compelling enough and standing on its own enough relative to both things, the Jewish community and the outside world.
It's very important. I just, one of my last discussion topics with my congregation was on the teachings of Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan. You're involved with the Reconstructionist movement, and more than a movement, he set a tone for Reform, Orthodox, and conservative, I think, across the board. One of the key points was how to bring Judaism in tandem with American civilization. That was very important in his thinking. And, I think one of the key problems, and I think you're touching on, is that the motto of Jews of the last century and a half was, I don't remember who's the author of the quote, it says, "Be a Jew at home and a man on the street." So you compartmentalized, as you said, where one of the answers is you're in Israel, for example. If you're in Israel, you're a Jew at home and a Jew on the street. You're free to act. You are part of that civilization. Well, but we got 6 million Jews sitting here. And many actually are going to Israel, but not that great a number. What do we do with the Jews here? Yeah. So how do we break that from be a Jew at home to a Jew on the street? And I'm going to ask you about that later on. But let me ask you, what is it that we have to offer the non-Jew besides bagel and lox? What are we offering?
Well, bagel and lox are the least of it. Yeah. In addition to bagel and lox, if you're just going to go with food, there's a whole world of Jewish food. We've already offered fish and chips. Fish and chips were originally a Sephardic Jewish origin.
Not British.
Not British.
Oh,
Actually, they came to Britain by way of the Sephardim.
oh my gosh.
But food is just the least of it. We have our whole way of thinking, our whole worldview. Our whole view that, for example, humanity and humanitarianism is important. How do we do this? How do we express this? For example, by having so many different holidays reminding us that once we ourselves were slaves. It's often generalism to say you should be generally humanitarian, but there is also the ritual component of it. And rituals really are important, rituals for reminding ourselves of these things. So it's not just Passover, it's also Sukkot. Passover is the holiday about what they ate, that they had to pack in a hurry. And they had to leave Egypt. Sukkot, about halfway through the year from Passover, is about where they ate, that they ate in these temporary shelters. So what they lived off and where they lived off of it, these are two important characteristics of what it meant to break for freedom from slavery.
That's a good tie-in. That's a good tie-in for Sukkot.
Yeah,
because you have the idea of you're in the middle of the desert, you have not much, and you're celebrating because you're not a slave.
yeah. And the whole community celebrating these things all at once is, as well, it's not just being a good person. Being a good person, you're kind of scattered. But if you have the communal practice of the remembrance of the story, of a story behind it, that is from your cultural heritage, then you can be more empowered by operating in a community. Yom Kippur as well, and Rosh Hashanah, these are the times of year to reflect. They're the times of year where you think about what you did over the course of the year and be a better person. Secular Americans often do it once a year around the New Year, the Gregorian calendar New Year. Jews who are secular Americans could do it twice a year. I do it twice a year, you know. But again, you're in sync with the rest of the Jewish people. Whereas if you just say you believe in your Jewish principles and you are outside in the secular world, acting on them, you're more out of sync with the Jewish people.
You know, it's interesting about rituals because earlier American culture came out of the Protestant and very biblical-oriented base, so that Thanksgiving is an outcome of Sukkot, in a sense. That this idea of giving thanks with the meal, community meal, after making it out. And a lot of that has been washed away. It's been watered down. So, in other words, we as Jews can help our non-Jews neighbors find association, find by practices and activities that tie in and bring in meaning into the values that we share.
Yes, that is true. That is true. I would say also Thanksgiving, there's a relationship between Thanksgiving and Sukkot. I celebrate Thanksgiving as well. I don't consider it the same holiday. Thanksgiving is about being thankful for coming to America. But one of the things that's missing from Thanksgiving relative to Sukkot is an actual remembrance of what the people faced. Sukkot has a remembrance of what the people faced when they were coming out of being slaves. And also that it's there's a lot of symbolism with the sukkah about how life is temporary. And the sukkah, it's not this incredibly permanent structure. It's a fragile thing that is open on purpose to the elements. It's Thanksgiving and Sukkot have their own parallels, but they do have differences in their themes as well.
Interesting, very interesting. Yeah, it's important to point out. Yeah, and that's where some of American culture has lost its roots, where it may have been there originally. Talk about open to the elements.
Yeah.
Our great-great-grandparents' home back in Dolina, the roof of the house opened up for Sukkot. So there was no roof. There were just branches. That's being exposed. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
That's how they did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. So now, so we have a lot to offer in terms of being able to tie values with actions that give them signifiers, that touch deeper emotions. And I think that is very different than just putting a click on some Twitter feed and saying like or dislike. I think it goes much deeper. It goes to our to elements of our brain that really make us do things the right way. So now, talked about reaching out. So I look at the Mormons. They send their young people for 2 years running around the world, dressed nicely, white shirt, black pants, wherever you go. And I don't know if they make converts in great numbers. They're pretty successful, I will say. But they also strengthen their own identity. I see Chabad also sending out young people, giving tefillin to kids. My grandson loves it. He stands at the corner of his school, walks out the door, Chabad are there, pass out the tefillin, then they have a free lunch. He loves that even better. So, but in doing so, it's not only the reaching out, but they're strengthening their own internal core beliefs. By action to others, you're confirming for yourself. So now, what do we do? How do we go about reaching out? What do we do?
So one of the things we should probably do is make our presence more known, more visible. There are a lot of Jews who are sort of there, and they have an opportunity to share their experiences with Judaism. They don't have to be Orthodox. They don't have to be religious. It's all about telling your own story. Judaism is not all or nothing. That's something else to be made clear. It is not all or nothing. It's each thing can add. And I believe there should be more of a gradient in how you would practice. Hence, I do support movements like Reconstructionist. There are some Jewish traditions that do block you from aspects of the secular world. These are places that Jews should be in. So everyone needs to find a balance, but the balance should be one that is pulling in the secular world rather than dispersing out the Jews.
So how do I reach out? I mean, you deal with social media.
Yeah.
How does it work?
How do you reach out? Social media, I found, is a way to amplify my voice so that one person can be much more. So I've reached a lot of people on social media. Basically, on social media, what you might want to do is write on forums that are about Jewish topics. Also, you might want to write on forums that are about Jewish adjacent topics, like traditional cultures or world religions, or in my case, Israel-Palestine peace building. And so part of it is about telling your story and presenting not exactly a propaganda message, but why it's meaningful to you and in all its nuance. You don't have to say all good things about it. Part of it is that it's about a real lived experience. Another is to invite people to participate in Jewish stuff with you if they seem interested. If they're not interested, you don't want to hit it hard. You don't want to force them. You don't want to coerce them. You don't want to hold it against them if they don't. But if it is a part of your life, many people will find it interesting too, even if they don't actually join Judaism. And part of it as well is talking to them about it. What is it? What's the significance of everything? There is a learning curve in a lot of synagogue services. And, but having a guide can still help. Same with Jewish rituals, Jewish traditions. So these are different things that you can do. Basically, amplify your voice. Amplify your voice. And if people want to come in, be there for them.
Okay. I've got, I mean, I do some of it. I'm not the world's great expert, but I use Facebook. I use, so our services, since we've been running for a year and a half on much reduced formats, and we opened up really back again only a few months ago with a small crowd, and even our holidays, we're doing very limited minyan in presence. So we really have a feeling of a congregation. The rest is online. So there's a lot, I do a lot of teaching in my service. And then what I try to do is make that session that I do teaching, I clip that video section, I post it with a summary of my notes. I've got a blog, I put it up. So, I always wonder, well, how do I get that blog out there to more people? I do see people coming in. The last month, most of the tracking data has been from Indonesia.
Wow.
Who in Indonesia is watching me? I don't know. Sometimes I know a lot of these are bots that are just looking for connections for advertising or business data mining, but I don't know. How do I get it out? Got a lot of information.
Okay, well, first of all, you want to use the social media that reflect you. So you're on Facebook. You want to think as well, what type of social media do you do best? Do you do short tweets best? Do you do video best? Do you do writing of more thoughtful things best? I'm the best at longer writing of longer things, on the order of like a few paragraphs to a couple of pages. And so different social media platforms are better for each of these things. You can also share it to the people you know. Facebook is basically designed for people to connect with people they already know and to keep in touch with them long term. That's what the friend system does. But because of Facebook groups, you can reach out to those people that you don't know as well. So for example, you can keep posting to Facebook on your own page, and you can also find groups. And it's a little bit of trial and error, which groups are going to be the right ones. So another thing about groups, by the way, that I'd like to mention to the congregants is that there's now a variety of shapes and sizes of online Jewish communities. And some of them are Jewish communities, some of them are mixed communities that have a heavily Jewish focus. There are all kinds of online communities. Peace Building, by the way, is a mixed community that, because of the impact of Judaism on Israel, it will have a heavily Jewish focus. And even if it's not a religious community, and there are a lot of Jewish communities that are religious communities, there are a lot of Jewish communities that are not religious communities, that are more cultural, but finding online groups can really connect people across geography. Historically, geography was what Jewish communities were structured around. Even in the past few years, that is no longer the case. That Jewish communities can contain individuals from all over the world. And this is what you could think about when you leverage the internet, that communities are no longer so local as the traditional synagogue is.
Yeah, but how do you create personal loyalty? I know when we get together, we have a kiddush lunch afterwards, everybody's sitting, they're chatting, so they're building bonds. How do you get bonding at a distance? How do you do it?
A lot of the bonding in the communities that I'm in is based on shared interests. And so, for example, building a shared future in Israel and Palestine is one of the things my community likes to focus on. And others focus on just discussing Jewish topics. Sometimes you just hit it off with somebody. And so part of it is that many of us originally, not all of us anymore, but many of us originally were writing and maintaining pages on the website Quora. So Quora, you write all kinds of personal stuff on it. You tell all kinds of personal stories. So by the time you got into some more permanent groups and you got to chat, you know a fair amount about the person. You've got things to talk about because they wrote it for a large number of people.
I see.
Yeah. So
now, I follow Quora, but it's sometimes interesting, sometimes a lot of junk written, and sometimes very good articles. So it's hit or miss. I know that. But yeah, I see what you mean. So you contribute. You have to be active with that and engage people in it. That's more how it works. That's very interesting. Yeah, because I saw you have your group. We'll have a chance to talk about that later on. We talk about bridging between Israelis and Palestinians and looking at moving beyond just the strictly political issues to connect between people who are at odds. And that's very important. And so I know later on what I want to do as we approach Balfour Declaration anniversary, I want to look at that target date and have your associate, Emmanuel, his last name Shahaf?
Shahaf, yes.
Shahaf, yeah, a very interesting figure, and your materials that you have with him, very cogent and to the point. I do want to have just another minute, because you had another article about Israel not recognizing some of the Bnei Anusim, the conversos, the people in Latin America who have Jewish roots going back to the Spanish Marranos, the refugees from Spanish Inquisition. And that's a fascinating topic in and of itself, which could take hours, because there are communities in Nigeria, the Igbo, that identify with Jews. Where else? Adiyaba, that is a community of identified with Jews. Many other places in the world. There are potential Jewish Jews in that. Even here in the United States, New Mexico, large number of people, Native Americans who are of Jewish origin. All right. So give me 2 minutes on that, and we'll wrap for the day, because I thought that's fascinating also.
Yeah. So this is you or me?
If you give me a few words about what you're looking at there with the conversos and reaching out. That's also part of reaching out.
Yes, it's part of reaching out. If people are coming to Judaism, then you shouldn't ask questions about what their background is. And if you don't ask questions, you get a lot of really interesting people, and you're going to get a very diverse community. And many of them will be Jews that we thought were lost to history, but in reality, they were not. there's now a movement that is quite significant among people who are descendants of people who were forcibly converted in the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions, and then they were persecuted. So there are tens of thousands, at least, of people now converting to Judaism. We've barely scratched the surface in reaching out to the potential people who might be interested in us. And they're curious. And some of them have come back. And they've returned to the traditions of their ancestors. Now, one of the things Israel has done, Israel has this administrative barrier that is blocking descendants of the Bnei Anusim who have converted in Latin America from making aliyah on the Jewish law of return. And so opening that up makes it possible to truly implement the law of return. These are people whose families had been persecuted for centuries, who are continuing to get questions from their community about their Jewishness, and in some cases were being shunned. And they must not be shunned by Israel. They are ours. Now, what is the nature of this barrier? Two things happened. One is that the Israel's Ministry of the Interior a few years ago, not the same administration as the one today, has decided they would not recognize Jews unless for the law of return, unless they were in an established Jewish community, unless they were being recognized by the local Jewish community. And the ones in Latin America, they tend to be in what's called immersion communities. That's an official Israeli legal classification. And they're not, the members of those communities are not eligible for the law of return. Well, rather, they are eligible for the law of return, but they're blocked. And they're blocked from the law of return being applied to them. And so, and the reason they're in these immersion communities is that the Jewish communities in many countries in Latin America did not accept converts. If you're just a returnee, not a convert, you can get recognized by a rabbi from elsewhere and you can go in. But if you're a convert, there's this combination of these two things, being in an immersion community and the Ministry of the Interior not recognizing that Jews in the immersion communities are eligible.
It's a very complicated picture. I know in Latin America, the Ashkenazic and the Sephardic communities sometimes don't recognize each other. There's a historic problems going way, way back. So they wouldn't intermarry, for example. They wouldn't be buried in the same cemetery. So there are a lot of internal things for Latin American Jewish communities, and it comes out of being oppressed. So I know a good friend of mine, family escaped from Shanghai to Argentina. His brother was not allowed to go to the Argentine Air Force because he was not a Catholic. So that's what spurred them to come to the United States. Very, very simple case, and that was not that long ago. So these are, old hidebound communities, defensive, yeah. But reaching out, breaking beyond the bounds. I know in Israel, for example, they finally got around to accepting the idea from the Ethiopian Jews of the Falashmura, those who had been left behind because they had identified or assimilated as Christian. And were they going to be now considered Jews, having gone and hid out as Christians? Are we going to bring it back in? We have, though, just in short, a large potential of old new Jews that can right, be a source of new population for Israel, or renew and reinvigorate Jewish communities where they are found. It's very possible. That's a topic, a big topic in and of itself, can go on and on and on. I want to thank you very much. You've spurred my thinking about how I can get my topics out so they're not just sitting there waiting for some bot from Russia or China to come across it, but actually reaching the people and getting a word out. Because, yeah, we do have something to say. And we've always had something to say by being in our civilizations and yet separate, in and apart. This is the great balancing act the Jews have always played. So how we will carry it through in order to maintain ourselves, to revitalize ourselves, to justify our continuation here in America. That's a big challenge for us. So I want to thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it very much. I want to thank you for your time, sharing your time and your thoughts with us. And I look forward to following through on the conversation with your colleague there, Mr. Shachav.
Yeah.
Okay, I wish you and the family a good year, Shana Tova, a good and healthy and happy year to all of you.
I want to thank you for having me speak to your congregation. I also would like to thank the congregants for listening, and I hope you are interested in this. But thank you.
Okay, and so this conversation is going to be kept up after the holidays. It's going to be up on Facebook and YouTube. So everybody who's found this of value can go then and share it on to others. So others can be in on this conversation. Have a great year, Shana Tova, sweet and good year.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.